In this video, I'm going to give you my predictions for UFC 286. We'll break down every fight on the entire card, and we'll look at some betting and prop opportunities along the way. As always, you can call me Kunith. Let's make some money this week. We're coming off the heels of UFC 286, which was a strange card to say the least. Some big favorites really flopped. We had an injury that stopped a fight, we had a draw on the card, and we had some of the worst judging we've ever seen. Let me know in the comments what was the worst scorecard at UFC 286. Now we have UFC San Antonio, and this is going to be a banger of a card. We have an amazing main event, easily fight of the night. If you have books out there that take fight of the night props, you might as well just lay this chalk, whatever it is. Cory Sandhagen and Marlon Vera, both fantastic strikers, prolific finishers, and at the very top end of a very competitive bantamweight division. For Chito Vera, he's got those long legs resulting in a lot of hard leg kicks, which are best used for 5-round fights. You can bank those early and they'll pay dividends in the 4th and 5th round. Defensively, he's super solid with his granite chin, excellent vision, and he throws a lot more power than most bantamweights, and it's sneaky power as well. And I say that it's sneaky because it doesn't look like he's putting everything into these strikes, but he's landing so cleanly when he does decide to open up. And he tends to get stronger the longer that the fight goes, which is perfect for 5 rounds. And a lot of the same could be said for Cory Sandhagen, who has crazy output. He throws every strike in the book, and he does it with speed and precision. He's only been finished once in his career, and that was a submission by Aljamain Sterling. He doesn't take a lot of damage, and just like Chito, he has cardio for days. And I do give him the slight edge in output. I think that output could win Cory Sandhagen this fight. Chito starts slow, comparatively speaking, because his 3rd, 4th, and 5th round normally looks a lot better than his first 2. And if Sandhagen can bank those first 2 rounds and steal one of the last 3, or at least keep it close enough to put a judge in a tough spot, he could go on to win this fight, and it wouldn't surprise me at all. And the way that Chito can win this fight is with his power and his accuracy, and also his grappling if the fight ever does get to that point, but it's more so the power. He has 6 knockdowns in his last 2 fights, 3 against Rob Font, 3 against Dominic Cruz. Chito cracks guys, while Sandhagen is more of a death by 1,000 cuts, which is why I think he lost the decision against Petr Yan and against TJ Dillashaw. He outlanded both of those guys, but he lost the majority of the rounds in the judges' scorecards, and I would just have to imagine that comes down to moments, not landing as heavily as often. Chito's never been finished, and if Sandhagen is just point fighting with him, he won't appear to do much damage, and that can hurt him when it comes to the scoring. Meanwhile, Chito can land a sneaky uppercut or knee or head kick and drop Sandhagen stealing a round. Vera's also not chasing these finishes. He doesn't rush anything. Even when he has guys hurt, he still stays composed, and that's bad news for his opponents. We see in MMA all the time, a guy lands something big, hurts his opponent, gets all excited and just wants to close distance. A great recent example of that is Song Kanan versus Ian Machado Gary, where Kanan rocks him and then he grabs the body lock and just sits there. Song Kanan gave him a chance to get back into the fight, as a result loses that fight. Chito Vera rocks you and stays in the area, but he's not jumping on top of you, giving you a chance to recover. So when you look at what both of these guys do really well, there's no doubt that this is going to be a sick fight, but I do expect Chito Vera to be able to win this fight via late stoppage sometime in the 4th or 5th round. And I say that because the likelihood of Sandhagen landing anything less than about 120 to 150 strikes is really low, which means he's in range, and if Chito's even close to that number, he's probably going to put him away. From a betting perspective, I like the value on Marlon Vera as the underdog here. From a Draftkings perspective, this could be one of those weeks where you have both fighters in the same fight show up on the optimal lineup. If you look at that fight with Rob Font, he scored 129 points. I believe Rob Font scored around 110 to 115, somewhere in that range. If we look at Sandhagen, he's throwing a ton of strikes, and if he does anything similar to what he did against Petr Yan, you're looking at a 79-point score, maybe even more this week. Salary-wise, if you're playing a single entry contest and you want to put both of those guys in there, I don't think that's a bad idea, especially depending on the size of the field. The smaller the field, the more that could pay off. But the pick for me in this fight is Marlon Vera by knockout. Now, Holm fight week is upon us. She's a legend of the game, gave us one of the craziest moments of all time. Her history in the sport of MMA and just the longevity in combat sports as a whole make her a legend. Holm, as we know, great striker, high fight IQ. She's seen it all and she's done it all in the octagon. Now, she is coming off a loss to Ketlen Vieira in a decision that was so bad that you would have thought they were fighting on last week's card. She won nearly every minute of that fight, and I thought for sure she was going to win a majority of the rounds. On the other side, we have Yana Kunitskaya, now Yana Santos. She's coming off a first-round knockout loss to Irene Aldana nearly 2 years ago. That's a lot of time off for her. And I can see that resulting in some ring rust, especially in front of a live crowd, and Holm is comfortable anywhere. She's been there, done that. I think she's going to have a hard time closing distance, landing strikes, and using any kind of grappling against Holm this week, who is in peak physical condition even at 41 years old. I think Holm cruises to an easy decision win this week, and that's a prop worth taking for sure. I just don't see a path to victory for Yana Santos, and I think she's going to look tired later. I think Holly's going to be fresher later, work her up against the fence, land short shots, and when they're at distance, blitz in, finish combinations with kicks, and just do what she normally does and grind out a decision win. So the pick for me in this fight is Holm by decision. Nate the Train is back. Love watching this guy fight. Tons of heart, power in both hands, sneaky grappling chops, and all action. He's fighting Austin Lingo this week. You might have seen my post on Twitter at Kunith MMA, but he is the featherweight Justin Gaethje in my eyes, and I can't wait to see him throw down this week. He came through for us last time in a big way with a gritty win over David Onama, where he was rocked and dropped, and it looked like it was all over. But he went full Darren Elkins on him, was able to come back from the dead, win that fight, and even late in that fight, he was knocking David Onama down, getting him down easily, and just letting him back up, which was top 5 coolest moments in MMA for me. Now, he does have a tough fight this week, and he is a big favorite over Austin Lingo, who was our darling a couple of weeks ago because he was for sure going to come through as an underdog against Ricardo Ramos. And while we liked him against Ricardo Ramos, this is different gravy this week. Ricardo Ramos crumbles under pressure. Nate the Train is pressure. I see Austin Lingo having some success because Nate the Train's very hittable, but I do think he'll be a slight step behind this week. Landwehr is going to land the better shots, harder shots, and he's going to win more rounds. This could have been fight of the night if the main event wasn't so sick, but this is brawler versus brawler, so give me Nate the Train Landwehr this week. I think he wins this fight by decision. Next, we're looking at a fight with Maycee Barber and Adriana Lee, and women's MMA has been harsh to say the least for the last few weeks. We had big favorites like Valentina Shevchenko, JJ Aldrich, and last week Juliana Miller lose. Even a promising prospect last week in Casey O'Neill fought a terrible game plan that was like Groundhog Day, where every exchange looked the same. And not a favorite that lost, but Joanne Wood, women's MMA, goes the distance and still shows up on the optimal lineup at low ownership on Draftkings. So women's MMA has been tricky, and this is another tricky one because we have Andrea Lee coming off a bad loss to Vivi Araujo, where she was dominated on the mat and really just beat up. She's 10 years older than Maycee Barber, who's just coming into her prime, it seems, and she's riding a 3-fight winning streak. But my issue with Maycee Barber is when you look at her 8 UFC fights, she's only recorded more than one takedown one time, and that was against Alexa Grasso in a fight that she lost. And I think that she's going to need those takedowns to win this fight this week. I think Adriana Lee could be stuck on bottom like she was against Araujo, but if Maycee Barber doesn't do that, I think that's a mistake. Now, Maycee Barber started her UFC career off hot with 3 knockout wins, but she hit a wall against Roxanne Modafferi and she tore her ACL in that same fight, and I don't think she's been the same since. She's no longer knocking people out, and she's not the greatest striker to begin with. And despite the 10-year age gap, I think Andrea Lee could win this fight because of her volume and her own takedowns. She's averaging more strikes, more takedowns, and better takedown accuracy, and she keeps fights competitive. She has 6 losses, but half of them are split decision. She's only been finished once, and that was 7 years ago. And again, women's MMA has been tough. Underdogs have been hitting hard, and I want a piece of that action. I think the co-main event with Holm and Yana Santos is a bit of a mismatch, but I think this one is a little bit closer than the line is indicating. So give me Adriana Lee to win this fight by decision. If you haven't already, like the video, subscribe to the channel, comment something for the algorithm because, well, you know how the algorithm works. Next, we're looking at a fight with Manel Kape and Alex Perez, and Manel Kape is hot right now, riding a 3-fight winning streak in the UFC. Dropped his first 2 fights to very strong competition, loses his debut to Pantoja, who's one of the best fighters and possibly the best fighter in the division, and then follows that up with a very questionable decision loss against Matthews Nicolau. But since then, he's looked fantastic. He finished Ode Osborne with a perfect flying knee, he poured it on Zolga Zumagulov and got a knockout finish there, and last time out, he really beat up on David Dvorak, and clearly he's got very heavy hands, super athletic, and a physical freak for the weight class. The man has 5 knockdowns in his last 3 fights and an iron chin. That combination makes him dangerous because he has no problem trading strike for strike with anyone in the division. On the other side, we have longtime UFC veteran Alex Perez, who's still only 30 years old. Perez is fighting for the first time since his first round loss to Alex Pantoja, which was really just one-way traffic. Before that, he got submitted in a championship fight against Davison Figueiredo. Perez shot a takedown, Figgy slapped on that ghillie, and it was over. He hasn't won a fight in nearly 3 years, and between now and then, he's had countless fights canceled for multiple reasons. So it's tough to want to get behind Alex Perez, but there are parts of his game that I do like. Despite his recent losses, I do like his wrestling, I like his jiu-jitsu, and he's got some of the best leg kicks in the division. We saw him chop down Jussier Formiga with those low kicks, and that's a weapon that he's used historically in his fights. And this fight is tricky because Manel Kape has big power, but Perez is historically durable. Perez has really good wrestling, but Manel Kape is crazy strong for 125 pounds. Manel Kape is currently around a minus 170 favorite, which I think is fair, but there is value on Perez at plus 145, and I assume that gets better during the week. And I say that because a lot of people I assume are going to be on Manel Kape this week. He's historically somebody who is a big favorite and people like to put money on him, and I could see why. But the path for victory for Perez is very clear. It's definitely with the leg kicks. Manel Kape does eat a lot of leg kicks, and he could be flat-footed at times. Now, Alex Perez will also need to get takedowns here, but I think that he can. Manel Kape is a strong grappler, but he's not Davison Figueiredo off of his back. I expect Perez to have slightly better output, chop down that lead leg from Manel Kape, and get him on his back early when he starts mixing in these takedowns, and I think he wins a decision here. For as good as Manel Kape has looked, I believe Perez is the better minute winner, and that's why I think he wins this fight by decision, and that's also why I have a bet on him as well. You can find all the bets, the DFS strategy guide, the projections model, and everything else that comes along with the website at kunithmma.com. You can choose the plan that works for you, and you'll get full access to everything, but I'll give you a little sneak peek. Alex Perez is definitely on the official bets for the week. Now, the next fight that we're looking at is Chidi Njokuani and Albert Duraev. Sometimes you need to fade yourself, or at the very least, you need to question your process a little bit, and that's what I did with this fight, because I looked at this fight and immediately thought Chidi Njokuani knocks Albert Duraev out. And I thought that because Albert Duraev stinks, and Chidi Njokuani has massive power, big advantages in height and reach, and this should be easy work for Bang Bang. I had to question why I don't think Duraev is good. Well, he got pieced up in his UFC debut against Roman Kopylov, and that's true. That was his debut as well. But yes, he did get pieced up. Roman Kopylov is an excellent striker, and he's hard to get down, rocking an 89% takedown defense, but Albert Duraev still won that fight. He follows that up with a loss to Joaquin Buckley, who's a tough fight for most guys, and he was a bad stylistic matchup for Duraev, being short, stocky, strong, lands heavy punches, good cardio, and he blew up those eyes of Albert Duraev, resulting in a doctor stoppage. What we learned from Duraev's first two fights is he can get touched up, but he's super tough and he can have some success grappling. And he'll need to lean on those strengths because of the tall task that he has in front of him this week in Chidi Njokuani. Chidi Njokuani has stupid power on the feet, but he also has issues on the mat at times. And if you don't believe that, just go watch the fight with Dusko Todorovic, who took him down twice in one round, and Dusko is converting takedowns at 12% accuracy. And even if you look at his last fight against RoboCop, he was cooked to the bone going into the second round against Greg Rodriguez, and he's even stated in interviews he has no interest in having long fights. Chidi wants to get in, land the big knockout shot, and get out, and there's nothing wrong with that. So when I take into account the toughness of Duraev, plus the grappling and how good it is when it works, versus the weaknesses from Njokuani, the takedown defense that could be spotty, as well as the bad gas tank, I could see Duraev pulling off an upset here. The line for this fight has flipped. Duraev was the favorite, now's the underdog, and I think that money's going to continue to flow in on Chidi Njokuani, but Duraev being the shorter man, better wrestler, dangerous grappler on top, I see value. The lines for this card aren't crazy juiced. They're not like last week where you have somebody like Juliana Miller at minus 500 or something like that. And while the lines aren't juiced for this one, I do think that this could be a pretty favorite heavy card. And I know I've picked some dogs so far, but we have to be careful with our dog shots, and it seems like the world is probably going to be on Chidi Njokuani this week. Duraev looks like value hiding in plain sight. If this fight goes beyond the first round, mark my words, Duraev is going to get his takedowns, get a rear naked choke, and get another UFC victory. So the pick for me in this fight is going to be Albert Duraev by submission. Now we're looking at a fight between Tucker Lutz and Daniel Pineda. Long layoffs for both of these men coming into this fight. Last time we saw Lutz, he faced Pat Sabatini in November of 2021, and last time we saw Pineda, he faced Andre Fili in June of 2021. Right off the bat, I can tell you that I like that long layoff to favor Tucker Lutz more than Pineda, because Tucker Lutz is only 28 years old, while Pineda's 37 years old. Now, Pineda is a strong grappler who's going to have a lot of success if he's able to get this fight to the mat, and we saw Pat Sabatini all over Tucker Lutz last time out when he controlled him for over 10 minutes, dominated that fight, and Pineda can do the same thing, but unlike Sabatini, I don't see him being able to do it for 3 rounds. Daniel Pineda's been fighting as a pro for 16 years and has 44 fights, and he's never won by decision. I see him gassing out quickly this week, and on top of that, he's been fighting as a pro since 2007, so when you account for the injuries, training, fight fight camps, fights, getting finished, testing positive. The dude's body is absolutely shot to bits. I see Tucker Lutz putting a hurting on him this week and finishing him in the second or third round with punches. Lutz needs to mind his P's and Q's early on the mat, but after that first round, I don't think Pineda's going to have much left. He needs to weather that storm, because after the first 5 minutes, we're going to see a shell of Daniel Pineda, and I think that's when Tucker Lutz really goes to work. So the pick for me in this fight is Tucker Lutz by knockout. Our next fight is with Steven Peterson and Lucas Alexander. Lucas Alexander is 0-1 in the UFC. His one loss equals the amount of strikes that he landed last time out against Joe Anderson Brito. He was absolute child's play for Joe Anderson Brito, who was very good. The fight was on short notice, but he blew the doors off him, took him down twice, submitted him, and did it all around 2 minutes. Outside of the UFC, he has wins, but it's against very low-level competition, and he's kind of a one-dimensional striker. He likes a kickboxing fight at range. He's not a great grappler, no submission wins on his record, only 10 fights into his career. And he's facing 29-fight veteran Steven Peterson, who's gone the distance with guys like Julian Erosa, Alex Caceres, Brandon Davis. He's 19-10, with only one of those losses being inside the distance. He has 7 wins by submission, so the record's not great, but the experience, I mean, it's night and day. He's won as many fights by submission as Alexander has wins overall. I see him going out there and putting on a heavy pace, using his wrestling, making this a grueling fight, finding himself in top position, raining down some heavy shots until Alexander gives up his neck, and I think Peterson is the favorite in this fight for really good reason. It's a very winnable fight for a guy that's still young in his career despite the tons of experience that he has at the professional level. Is the record great? No chance, but there's a lot of learning that comes with 10 career losses, especially when 9 of them are by decision. So I like the experience, the pace, and the submission upside from Steven Peterson. The pick for me is Steven Peterson by submission, and I think you can comfortably make him a parlay piece this week. Next, we're looking at a fight with Trevin Giles and Preston Parsons. Parsons is a strong grappler coming off a decision win over Evan Elder, where he dominated with his wrestling. He was constantly looking for submissions, and he won every round. On the other side, Trevin Giles is coming off a decision win over Louis Cosi in one of the worst fights I've ever seen. Up there with Ngannou and Lewis and Carla Esparza, Rose Namajunas too, Giles landed 25 significant strikes in the entire fight, with 0 of them coming in the third round. I figured he would have been cut after such a performance, but here we are. On his best day, Trevin Giles has a really smooth jab, solid takedown defense, wrestling of his own, and he's pretty steady. At 6 feet tall, he's not a huge guy, which is why he's probably come down from middleweight to welterweight recently. And while I thought the weight cut would be good for him because he'd probably have more strength than some of the guys at welterweight, I just don't think that's going to translate, and I don't see him having a ton of success in the division. And I say that because he's really low output, and he's been finished in all of his losses. Parsons has also been finished in all of his losses, but he's younger with fewer fights, and I would assume fewer miles on the body. What I like for Parsons here is that while Giles has shown KO power in the past, his output just doesn't scare me enough to make me think that he's going to knock out Preston Parsons. Not only that, but given that he has low output, he's not going to throw a lot of strikes, and he's not going to have the opportunity to throw a lot of strikes because he's probably going to spend most of the round defending takedowns or trying to get back up. And if Parsons is able to get his takedowns, I think that he can find a submission here. If Giles comes out flat like he has recently, I think that Preston Parsons is going to be able to get his takedowns early and often, so give me the younger guy, the stronger grappler, give me Preston Parsons by submission. Next we have CJ Vergara fighting Daniel Lacerda. This fight on paper is similar to a fight that's going to be earlier in the card but later in the video. CJ Vergara is steady Eddie. He throws punches, stuffs takedowns, throws punches, and stuffs takedowns. He's got a good chin on him, 3-round cardio, and he's shown that he can dig deep later into fights, which is always a good trait to see. He's 1-2 in the UFC. Watching live, I thought that he beat Ode Osborne. He follows that up with a win over Cledson Rodriguez, where he was a 3-1 favorite. We sniffed that out pretty nicely, and he was able to win that fight with that steady approach. Last time out, he was fed to Japanese grappling ace Tatsuro Taira. That's a fight that you can give him a pass for. On the other side, we have the glass cannon of all glass cannons in Daniel Lacerda. 0-3 in the UFC, no semblance of durability, cardio, or fight IQ, just dynamite in his hands and explosive kicks for a couple of minutes. And that alone doesn't cut it in the UFC. We've seen this guy break in front of dudes as a result of that not working, because on the regional scene, he's smoking low-level guys. The confidence is sky high. But at the highest level, when you land your best stuff and the man in front of you is still working, that's a whole other ball game. And in those situations, again, we've seen him break right in front of our very eyes, most recently against Victor Altamirano. He was having success early, dropped Altamirano, was able to get on top, landing ground and pound, but once Altamirano was able to work back to his feet, we were all basically ripping up our Daniel Lacerda tickets right then and there. Gets kneed to the body, crumbles like blue cheese, and says, "No more, I'm full, thank you very much." And I see a very similar situation this week. I think he lands on Vergara, gains some confidence, then Vergara lands a combination of his own. That's going to cause Lacerda to look for a way out. CJ Vergara's got that blue collar approach, right? He's a grinder, and that's the worst stylistic matchup for a guy like Lacerda, and that's why I think CJ Vergara wins this. Again, Lacerda hasn't shown durability nor the heart to go 15 minutes if he starts losing, so I think that CJ Vergara wins this fight inside the distance, most likely a TKO sometime in the first or second round. Next, we're looking at a fight with Trey Ogden and Manuel Torres, and let me tell you something. Every now and again, a fighter comes along who you just have a perfect read on. We all have these fighters in our lives, and it's someone who spends most of their career on the prelims. They maybe never crack the top 15, but you just know if they're going to win or lose. For me, that fighter is Trey Ogden, and I'm 2-0 on my predictions when it comes to Trey Ogden. In his UFC debut, I thought he'd get out-grappled by Jordan Levitt, which was the case, and I expected him to follow that up with a veteran performance against Daniel Zellhuber at plus 310, and he did exactly that. Trey Ogden's a good grappler. Trey Ogden has good experience. He's been in the fight game for a while, and somebody like Zellhuber, a young guy who hasn't really seen much in there, isn't going to give him all that much trouble. Trey Ogden's not a great striker, but he is durable enough and experienced enough to be able to stand across from somebody like that and win minutes. This week, he fights Mexican striker Manuel Torres, who's coming off 4 straight first-round finishes, most recently that first-round knockout over Frank Camacho. Now, take it from me, a Trey Ogden whisperer. I know how this fight's going to go. We get another knockout win for El Loco this week. Let me tell you why. Trey Ogden's a grappler. Again, the man cannot strike all that well. Against somebody like Daniel Zellhuber, yes, he'll look good. Manuel Torres, no way. And Trey Ogden's one of these guys who's a strong grappler in situations where grappling is initiated, but he has poor offensive wrestling. He can't really strike all that well, and I think he's going to get lit up on the feet. He's trouble on the mat, but he has trouble getting it there. Now he has to deal with a guy who's got fast, powerful hands, who's more athletic, and is 6 for 6 on takedowns defended in the UFC and Contender Series. What happens when a one-dimensional grappler gets stuck in a striking battle? You normally get what you got from Juliana Miller last week. Everyone and their mother was on Zellhuber to knock out Trey Ogden last time, and we learned that Zellhuber was a little too green. The moment might have been a little too big, but he doesn't hit as hard as advertised. That's something we know for damn sure. That's not the case here with Manuel Torres, who's got that real steel Hugh Jackman in his hands. I expect him to catch Trey Ogden early, often, find a knockout, probably in the first round. Give me Manuel Torres by knockout. Finally, we get the UFC debut of Vinicius Salvador. He's had some fights fall through, but it looks like we're going to see him this week. We'll see that big power in action. Salvador throws everything into his strikes, and he's swinging for the fences, and that style leads to a lot of knockouts. And we saw that on Contender Series against Shannon Ross, and if you look at some of his regional fights, dude is throwing hammers like he works for Bowser. When you have that power, fighting that way, just throwing everything with ill intent, is a double-edged sword, because it gets you the result that you're looking for quickly, or it can suck down your gas tank to basically nothing. Now in MMA, sometimes us as fans, we look at fighters who have 1 round of gas and think, dude, if you just pace yourself, you'll be fine. Don't rush the finish. The finish will come. Just try to touch them up, land, and the power will be there. You don't have to gas out late if it's not. But I feel sometimes we ignore that might be the reality of a way that a guy is able to win fights more often than not. We've talked about this before, but Terrence McKinney is a great example of this. Terrence McKinney is as explosive and as fast as they come. That's what makes him dangerous, but his gas tank isn't good because of that style, but that style is the only way that he's going to have success. If Terrence McKinney tries to be patient and pace himself, he's going to have trouble, just like he did last time out against Bonfim. Fighters need to stay true to themselves to have the most success. Sometimes when guys abandon what gets them to the big dance, they won't have success. Take Casey O'Neill, for example, who didn't shoot for a takedown last week. Don't be something that you're not. And I don't think Vinicius Salvador is a technical striker who's going to piece you up for 15 minutes. He's either going to knock you out in 5 or you're probably going to beat him. And that doesn't mean that somebody's a bad fighter, and doesn't even mean that they're a limited fighter. That's just kind of the style that they bring to the table. But that's going to be tough this week against Victor Altamirano, who's got a great chin, endless cardio, and is willing to wrestle. Again, I think Salvador has 3 to 5 minutes to get this guy out of there, or he's going to get cooked. On paper, Altamirano's landing over 7 significant strikes per minute, landing 2.23 takedowns per 15. I could see pace, pressure, volume, wrestling, all of that breaking Salvador, who may gas early, especially considering that it's his UFC debut. He's going to be in front of a live crowd, and he's been put off from this multiple times. So there's going to be a lot of nervous energy going into this. Either he wins early or Altamirano TKOs him in the 2nd or 3rd round. I don't see this fight going the distance, and if you are on MMA Twitter or gambling Twitter, you know that flyweight unders are slapping this year. Flyweight is the new heavyweight in terms of hitting unders and getting finishes. So the pick for me in this fight is Victor Altamirano inside the distance. And the next fight that we're looking at is Haley Cowan and Tamaris Vidal. Haley Cowan was supposed supposed to fight a few weeks ago, but she pulled out the day before the fight with illness, canceling that fight against Perez. Now she's matched up a few weeks later with Vidal, who's 1-0 in the UFC after picking up a first-round finish last time out over Romana Pascal. We picked Vidal that day because of her striking ability, the big age gap. She was 10 years younger than Pascal, and Pascal's looked unathletic in the UFC, to put it lightly. In that fight, Vidal looked much faster, cleaner with the striking, and was able to fold up Pascal with a knee to the body. She was an easy choice that night, but not so much here. I expect Haley Cowan to be bad news for her. Vidal in her regional pass has really struggled with wrestlers, and we see time and time again when these young fighters get into the UFC, get put on their back, and look completely lost. I expect Cowan to be able to close distance quickly, get her takedowns going, and win a decision. When the fight was announced, Vidal was a sizable favorite. The line has since flipped, and that's for good reason. Sharp bettors are seeing what we're seeing. Grappling deficiencies, you can't really trust that in the UFC. So give me the better grappler out of the two. Give me the better camp out of the two. She's training with UFC veterans like Montana De La Rosa. I think that Haley Cowan wins this fight by decision. If you've made it to this point in the video, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, comment something for the algorithm, and I'll see you for final picks later in the week.